Tyrese Maxey on offense barely put a foot wrong that entire game. I mean, even if you're just going based on the box score, right? What he finished the game with? 37 points, 11 rebounds, or 9 rebounds, 11 assists,
triple-double.
1 turnover, shot 57% from the field, ices the game with 2 free throws, and it was an absolute scoring clinic. Like, to me, what that performance reminded me of is Kyrie Irving, because some of those, and thankfully Kyrie Irving and not a wacko off the court and all that, but the shots off the glass where it looks like some of those have no chance to go in. The mixing of speeds, the ability to hit the step back jumpers, frankly, the heavy leaning on the mid range, which we've talked at times during the season and said that's been one of his weaknesses. But I think over the last month and a half, maybe, that's really come along. Like, that's been a weapon for him. And he's talked about how that's a piece of his game that his dad always harped on him. Like, you got to improve that. That's going to be important in the big moments. And he shrugged it off. And now Tyrese is like, Dad, I see the wisdom in that. And so to see him kind of recognize in every stretch of this game where they needed it, Miami went on that monster run to open the second quarter. And I honestly thought the Sixers had played well, at least in terms of the offensive process, and were just missing shots. But they clearly needed someone to grab the game and say, it's all right, guys, we got this. And it ended up falling on Tyrese. And not only did he send them to a lead, they should have gone into halftime up probably like 10 to 15 points. Most of that was because of Tyrese. And for him to get to this point, I think we saw this more at the beginning of the season when Joel was healthy and they did have both these guys. The Embiid-less lineups have been so much better this year because Tyrese has now figured out how to pick his spots, when to step up as a scorer, when to be a playmaker, all that kind of stuff. He was relentless when they needed him to be tonight. He's had bigger games in terms of the point totals. That might be the best game that he's played when you consider the circumstances. It's a big game for playoff positioning and what have you. The playmaking, the lack of turnovers, the scoring, the crunch time stuff, like just an unbelievable game for him.
Before you go, 15 points in the first quarter for Maxey, 9 in the second and the fourth, to your point of his big quarters, only 4 in the third, but when they needed it, the 9 in the fourth.
Yeah, and it really is like, I feel like the first couple years of Tyrese, it's like, yeah, he runs really fast, but what else can he do, especially off the dribble? We talked about this after the last Miami game. I wrote about it recently as well. Miami is so good at denying shots at the rim. They really sell out to prevent those from being there. And Tyrese got a couple of real quick layups early on, and then they adjusted. And he drilled his deep, deep threes, and he got to his spots in the mid-range. And what he was able to put together against a team that is almost designed to take away his strengths, against a team that has a really good squad of perimeter defenders, and in a game where they really needed him because they just could not do, outside of Tyrese, and Joel in the first half, he was struggling in the second half. Outside of Tyrese, they had nothing consistently going at all. They were playing pretty much nonsense basketball offensively for most of the fourth quarter until Kelly took over. But Tyrese carried them pretty much all night. And I think what Kyle said was correct. When you factor in the defense they were going against, how important the game was, just how the game was flowing and how nobody else was really able that you can rely upon, this was as good of a game as we've seen from Tyrese Maxey all year. And I know he's put up more points. I know he's had huge games. But circumstance, overall play, this was phenomenal.
And you look at the stat line, of course, with the 37 and the assists and the rebounds. He was doing things, again, to help out overall wherever they needed it. Of course, the scoring, but he still had enough energy, as we know. And this is also coming off of missing the game that he did, where it was looking like, okay, is he going to be okay? Is he going to be fine? He missed the previous game on Tuesday against the Oklahoma City Thunder, but he comes right back and he does this, and he gives you the assists. Of course, Embiid helps because that's a target that you have. He probably should have had a few more assists when finding Buddy Hield out there for some open shots. A few others. They couldn't make three-pointers during one stretch where he was finding guys for open opportunities because of the scoring, of course, that he was doing out there individually. But we talk about it so much where we look at this guy as a star player and we wonder, a lot of the question early on when Embiid was there, can Tyrese Maxey team up with him in the postseason? These are essentially postseason games for them now going down the stretch.
That was basically a playoff
Exactly.
game. In intensity and opponent, all that.
Yes, so he is showing again. Now, while we have seen it in years before, Toronto in first round matchups where he's putting up 40, where other players are struggling offensively. Boston, where he's trying to crack that code and then ends up in a big game 5 spot on the road and gives them 30 in that matchup where Embiid goes for 33 to give them a 3-2 lead for game 6 on their home floor. So we've seen good playoff moments from Tyrese Maxey. And we see this here tonight where he goes out there and sets the tone with Embiid. 15 right out of the gate. He scores 8 of their first 12 right from the start. 2 3-pointers and another mid-range jumper, as Kyle talked about, where they needed that one as well to take some of that pressure right away off of Embiid and show that he can get things started. Where we have seen when Embiid was out, he scores, he sets up others for him to score later on to get them going. So he takes that pressure immediately off. And then as they do their other things with the rest of the teammates, he gets going. So while this may not really answer your question for the postseason when it comes to what's it going to be against whatever opponent it is once we get started in April, we don't know that. But what he is showing you, because again, as Kyle just said, this was a playoff game in every sense of the word for the tie-breaking situation, to avoid any type of play-in possibly, and if so, maybe move up to that 7 seed. And he did so, not only doing it with the numbers, but he did it on the road. He did it against a defense that went zone. He did it against guys where you had Jimmy Butler on him. You had Haywood Highsmith with some energy and some length on him, and he still found a way. Now, he had that one bad play where he had that offensive foul, and Caleb Martin, I believe, picked that one up. But other than that, he was phenomenal tonight. And again, I believe it just simply answers questions that we have at least going into. We'll just when we get there, if it doesn't play out the way that we think it should based on these performances. But the overall game plus the floor game, just one turnover in all of those minutes. And when we just talked about those minutes in that Cleveland game where he didn't perform well, and we had a couple of people saying he's playing far too many minutes, you're probably right. But having that time off and then coming back and playing big minutes in this outing here against Miami and playing 41 minutes and doing what he did was just a phenomenal showing. And by the way, he got up 14 3-pointers in this one.
He was hoisting.
None of them were, what, you can maybe point out 2 that were tough.
Kyle was sitting here, don't pass the ball. You should have the ball the entire 24 seconds. Yes.
We all silly like the mayor.